no, I think that's the hardest part about being a young adult in your 20s is you, at least I did, and I feel like a lot of people I know did, is we felt like we had these very fixed ideas and we had arrived at these truths that felt very concrete. And when they get knocked around a bit, you're like, hey, wait a second, you gotta just like be open to it more. So I would just say, don't let the bastards get you down.
I will run, I will rise, I will grow like the world's never known.
All right, welcome back to another Evolutional One. Today we are having part 2 of our conversation with Amy. And this part, the reason I kind of separated this is when we really get in and start talking about how she published her first and second children's book. And so I thought that this audience would really be people that are wanting to write their own book, children's book, you name it. I'm in the process of writing my first children's book, and so that was one of the reasons why I reached out to Amy, and she was nice enough to give me her time between all the things that she does. She is extremely talented, and it's been really cool to watch her grow, and her work's just beautiful. Like I both of these books, I actually have one right here, her first one, When Charlie Met Emma. It's actually really great, so I will leave links below to go check that out. And so this conversation is really about the process she went through to publish her books, the journey of the book itself. And if you're interested, you can go back and listen to her backstory. Otherwise, we're going to jump right in. And here's the second half of the conversation with Amy.
But all this to say that, like, when you finish a product like this, it's like so many people had their hand in making something like this happen.
So I'm curious, did you ever, why traditional publishing? Why not the self-publishing route?
So I was open to self-publishing. If I was like, okay, if it doesn't happen, like, I'm open to self-publishing, but I was like, I want to see if I can do this. I want to see if I can crack this nut.
Was it the prestige of it? Is just like honestly, what exactly, why the traditional seemed more appealing?
It's interesting because you talk about like entrepreneurs and all these things. I don't really feel like I'm an entrepreneur. I feel like I'm a creator, and it feels so daunting to me to think about the process of, like, I'd have to choose a font. I'd have to lay it out. Like, that sounds horrendous. I mean, I know it sounds so stupid, but I even remember, like, when I was giving birth to my oldest daughter, and my last daughter, I had an epidural, but like my first daughter, I was like, it just sounds like a pain. Like, I have to get this thing. I just want to go in and have the baby. I don't have to deal with all this extra stuff. Like, and so I think so honestly, a big part of it is like, the business end of things, the nuts and bolts of things, sometimes that's not my strength. And so even though there's definitely a process that you have to follow to seek out traditional publisher, but I was really like, I want someone who knows what they're doing on that end. To have to sell it, to have to do the platform. Like, I just didn't want to mess with
the team.
Yeah.
It's not something the rest of it wasn't enjoyable, and it was, you had the idea that you wanted to get out and you didn't want to do all of it. That makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't want to do all that stuff. And so but like I said, I was open to it. But I will also say this: while self-publishing is a very valid way of publishing, and it's legit and people make money, all those things, my book would not be what it is. Part of it, like, I would know now, but I wouldn't have known then, like, you should hire a professional editor. Because I went in, I wrote my book. I probably wrote like 16 or 17 different versions of it, tried to tighten it up. And then I had to do a lot of there's so many days when you're pursuing something like this where you do a lot of work that you have like nothing to show for it, but it's like part of the process. So there's a lot of days of just researching publishing houses and editors and also literary agents, because it was like I was gonna approach literary agents and publishers, because you can do either. And so there was just a lot of days. I mean, I have, just a spreadsheet I made of like information.
Sorry, I don't know the difference between literary agent and a publisher.
Okay, so publisher, I mean, a literary agent is someone that you, like, if you are an aspiring author, a lot of times you want to go to a literary agent because they're the person that like broker the deals with publishers. Okay. So they'll take like a cut of what they do, but a lot of times they have the inside scoop on like on which publishing houses, and they have these relationships. So, okay. And if you're planning to be like you want to be an author as your like career, then you probably want a literary agent. If you want to make it like not just one book, but like you want to write, like be an author, lots of books, then you'll probably want a literary agent. And for someone like me, I was like, oh, well, I'm open to either. Like, great if I can get a literary agent, but you can send a query letter directly to publishers, publishing houses. But I mean, you also you have to look up every single publishing house. You have to look up their specific way they want the letter. I mean, that was the one thing that I learned about this process is like, it's a very traditional, old, what am I trying to say, industry. And they have very specific rules. And you could have a really great book, but if you like misspelled the editor's name, you're going in the slush pile. They're not even going to read it. And so you have to be very thorough. So anyway, there was a lot of weeks spent just doing that kind of work that wasn't very fun. But again, that sounded so much easier to me than like trying to figure out like where would I get a book published. But anyway, I was going to say, as I was researching, I was learning that a lot of people they're like, we won't even look at a children's book if it's over 1,000 words. We don't want more than 1,000 words. And I was like, and my book was about 1,300 words at that point. And I thought, well, but my book, like, I have to have a lot of words. It's this really important message, And so thankfully, when the publishers did reach out and they were like, are you open to working with us to editing it down? I was like, absolutely. And, in the end, it was 750 words. And it's a much better book for it. And so there is definitely something to be said for if you're gonna go the self-publishing route, hire a professional editor. I mean that. And I know, and I will say, like, again, and I've had there's a lot of other people there's a lot of people who have also published books, children's books about disability, and many of them are self-published. And sometimes I can tell because they are, and honestly, one of the biggest things is just length. And it's interesting how, you don't, I don't know, like, now that I know and understand the importance of that for a children's book, I can see that it's a big thing. I mean, we know what it's like to read a book to our kids. We don't want to choose the book that's going to be a 20-minute bedtime book. You want your 10-minute bedtime book, right? So it's really, and so it's interesting, but it's like, it's a really big deal in publishing for children's books. And that's also what makes them, deceptively difficult, is that you've got to be very succinct with your words, and you've got to say a lot with as few words as possible. But I loved that process. I loved, working with my editor, we'd go back and forth, and there were times that he took things out and I'd be like, hey, this is actually, and that was a great thing too, is that I honestly feel so lucky to have gotten the publishing house that I did, and the editors and people I worked with, because they were just, there was a mutual trust there, and they really trusted me to understand what I understood about disability, and to, because I would say, like, this really needs to be in here, and I would defend it and explain to them why that was an important, they'd be like, okay, great. Like that makes sense, or,
yeah.
So it was a really good thing. So, anyway, all that to say that I do think self-publishing can be great. And people, I know, I went to the conference again last year and met with other authors who are self-published and who made more money than I do. You can definitely make, if it's about that and stuff and the money, but again, like, these were women who maybe already understood distribution to a certain point, and right. And again, like, I think one woman in particular who I talked about, she was also like, yes, I hire a professional editor to do all this. So I just think you just got to make sure that you really, if you're going to do it, self-publish it, just like go that extra step.
So at what point did you then incorporate, you already knew the illustrator that you wanted to work with. Had you already reached out to her? At what point did she come in the mix? Was it all happening the same time while you're writing and doing the editing, or it sounded like you wrote it all up front then?
Yeah. So I started writing the book like immediately, like on the plane ride home from the conference. Like I was fire lit, let's go. And then I contacted her right away after the conference, because again, I had no idea the process of pitching a children's book. And so she was great, because she also, having worked in publishing, both as an illustrator, but she worked in New York City at a publishing company before. She was like, she educated me on the fact that, like, unless you're an author illustrator, you don't pitch together, which I think is the biggest misconception. Most people think if I'm writing a children's book, I have to get an illustrator and then we send that together. You don't do that. So she was like that. She said, but kind of with our story, like maybe this would work, because we're both kind of in this industry together. We're both bloggers, and she, because she was immediately like, loved the idea. She wanted to be part of the book. She was really great and super supportive. She wasn't very vocal about it at the time, but one of her children was on the spectrum, and it wasn't something she had talked a lot about. So she very much believed in the message of the book. But she was like, I just, I don't know about trying to pitch together, but I could talk to my agent. She was an illustrator. She had an agent. And so we were going to pitch together. We had talked several times on the phone. And then at some point, because she does so many different things, she makes dolls, she runs her own business, that she does so many different things. I mean, she's seriously amazing. She just had to bow out, and she was just like, I'm so sorry. Like, I can't, really spend my time on this right now, which I understood. It wasn't her baby. She wasn't making any money on it, and so she needed to put her efforts towards that. But, and I said, hey, if, this, and she was like, good luck. I wish you all the luck in the world. She'd also put me in contact with some other people in the industry and had done more. I mean, she'd been really great about giving me, resources and stuff. And it was just sort of like we parted, and I just said, but if this does happen, like, can I put your name in the hat? She was like, absolutely, I would love that. And then it happened,
And when she parted, how far, what was the timeline? How far in were you on that at that point?
Maybe I was like 6 months. It was pretty early on. Maybe I was like 6 months into it. So I don't know, maybe a little bit further. We had a few long phone calls where I talked about, I think, like some of, my vision for the characters and some things. And I think I had sent her a couple versions of the book. Here, this is actually another crazy story when you, like, the universe kind of momentum thing. She was like, well, I'm going to put you in touch with my friend Justin, who works in New York City. He's an editor, or I think he was her editor, but he worked in publishing. And so I sent him my manuscript, and he was, and this is what I learned too about this industry, is that, like, people don't BS you. Like, if they think it sucks, they're just going to tell you, or they're not going to give you time. I was very grateful. Anyone who gave me any information, I was super grateful, because I knew it was kind of like a closed knit thing, and or a tight knit group. And he wrote me back, and he was like, yeah, this is great. Like, I actually really like this. Let me think if there's anyone I can, send this to who this might be a good project for. Because again, even, certain publishing houses and even certain editors, it's like, they might like your thing, but that's not what they do. That's not what they're specializing in. And so there's all these, different kind of things you have to be mindful of. And we wrote back and forth a couple times, and I don't know what it was, about like maybe the third time we emailed, I was like, I just said his name. I was like, wait a second, Justin, and then I emailed him, and I was always trying to be really professional, but I was like, I'm so sorry. I just have to ask you this. Like, I think you might've been my manager at Los Hermanos in Provo, like 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And he was like, he was like, oh my gosh, because I didn't know he was Mormon or any of those things. But yeah, I was like, your name just hit me. But like, dude, I knew. He was like, that's so crazy. He's like, yeah, I was a manager at Los Hermanos in Provo. And it was just another one of those like super crazy connections that I was just like, what is even happening here?
You have all these callbacks. Oh my gosh.
No, that was nuts. So
that's insane.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. It was wild though, because it's like I went through the process of, I did all the things the traditional route, which is you send your query letters out. And that's not how it
How,
happened.
how
What?
many of those did you send out
I don't know.
before
Probably.
you caught the one that ended up working out?
Well, see, that's the thing. I didn't send a query letter to them. She read my blog post, right? And so
Oh, that's right.
I went the traditional route as far as like I followed all the rules, but in the end, it was an untraditional way that it came about.
Do you remember how many you sent?
I could look at my spreadsheet. I would guess around like 50 or 60. I mean, I was gonna go for a while. Like I was really excited to get my first rejection letter because it was just like someone read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just the excitement of knowing, okay, someone's read this, because a lot of times you don't get a rejection letter because they're like, we're so sorry, we just have too many people. If you don't hear from us in 6 weeks, just assume it's a no. And so anyway, it's like your first rejection letter, first couple are exciting. After like 10 or 15, you're kind of like, oh, it's not so much. And I don't even know if I got that many. I sent a lot more out. I probably only got like a handful of actual letters back. So even though it kind of sucks to get the rejection letter, you also realize at least people are reading it, you know, because many of them you don't hear back from at all because, again, they just have too many. Because that's the thing about the children's market is that, you know, it doesn't take a lot of time to write a children's book, and so they get flooded. I think you get flooded with a lot more manuscripts than like novels or, you know, those kind of things.
Right.
So
And so when you were able to connect and get it in the works, how long in were you at that point?
So I feel like, I mean, I would have to like go back and look at all the different dates of everything. Because the other thing is like the woman, and her name was Rachel, who reached out to me and said, hey, I work at this publishing house. I'm not a decision maker. I can't tell you that this would happen, but I really feel like I would love to help you, you know, figure this out. Even if it's not our publishing house, I would love to help give you any other advice to get this published. So that was awesome, right? And but then she handed it off to her people, and at that point, I think I'd kind of taken a break. And so so if you're looking to publish children's, here's another thing you should join. It's SCBWI, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So this is a national. A lot of times, in fact, when you're sending query letters, they will ask, "Are you a member of SCBWI?" It's like a $95 a year or $90 a year to be a part of it. There's they have conferences. I mean, there's a lot of like, it's just a big national society, and there's local chapters. So I had joined that because it was good to join it. There's message boards where people give different information. And then there was also like kind of contest, like different things. So I know one of them was like, they were looking for books about featuring diversity. And if you won, then you would get like a meeting with an editor or something like that. And so I had kind of taken a break from sending out the book when I gave it to her. And so I was my next thing was like, I was getting ready to gear up to like enter this contest, because I didn't hear back from them for 6 months. So, I mean, when I'm telling you that like other publishing houses were like, if you don't hear back from us in 6 weeks, assume it's a no. I had assumed it was a no. I didn't hear back from them for 6 months. So I just assumed it was a no. And then one day I just got an email and they were like, hey, we'd love to publish your book. And I was like, I didn't even think it was still an option. So that was crazy too. It was a 6 month break in between when I originally gave it to her and when they accepted. And then it was a little bit back and forth of signing the contract, because that's a whole other thing. And just kind of getting all the things right and making sure that you just educating because if I paid for sorry, I'm giving you a lot of nitty gritty. Just, I don't know if you want all this, but if you pay for a lawyer, it's like good to have a lawyer look over it, but that would be like more than half of my advance. And so I was like, and so thankfully my publishing company, they tried to keep their contract very simple so that like you can look it over yourself, because they recognize that it's a lot of money for most people to hire a publishing lawyer, but you want to research that enough to know, because, for example, one thing that can happen is that if you don't have, you should make sure that they have a publish by date on there, because sometimes people will buy your book and then they will never publish it, or like and not like they do it maliciously, but maybe they put it off and something happened and then you can't get it to anyone else. So for example, things like that. So even just going back and forth with the contract, I just had to spend some time like researching. So there was a lot of research in between everything, right? But I think, so then when we signed, from like the time it was signed till it was actually published was 1.5 years. So again, it's just it's a long cycle for them.
And you had already written it. That was like the editing and then getting the illustrator in, and then and then from the other side, from their side, they also do like one of the things that, in talking with my other friend, is she talks about like there's a team that helps like market it, right, and get it ready to publish, because there's all the back end of what they do. And how involved are you as the author in that process?
Well, I will say that I think a lot of publishing houses are different. I spoke with a panel last year at Alt Summit of other women who publish books, and so there's a range. Now, I was the only children's book author, and most of them were doing like a craft book or things like that. But I will tell you that especially, I think outside of children's publishing, part of when you're pitching something, you're expected to have a marketing plan with you. They rely heavily on the author to market it. So it helped a lot that I don't know that it helped. I don't know. I've never talked about this specifically with them, but after I sent the manuscript and I would reach out to the woman who had connected me at the publishing company, and I remember saying to her at one point, I said, would it help if I came up with a list of people that I know, like influencers and people who would agree to like, she was like, anything like that will help. And, because I had to get off of my little like idealism high horse and like, someone's going to want to publish this book because it's such a good message, and realize it's a business. They want to know that they can make money. At the end of the day, unfortunately, like it can be a really great message, but if they don't think it's going to sell, they're not going to like publish it out of the goodness of their hearts. And so I did, I sent this letter, and I had reached out to a bunch of people who said, with large platforms on Instagram and things, that said like, yeah, I'd love to help. And so but they did hire a publicist who worked with me. Now they have a publicist in-house. And so we work together. I feel like I'm still in the process of like trying to get some things out for my second book, because again, it just came out in September. So also realizing, I mean, that's the cool thing about a book too, is like having written blog posts before that kind of like explode and then like fade. It's like books are different, like they live, like they have like this different life of their own. And so even with Charlie and Emma, my first book, like I've seen times where it's just like the resurgence of sales has gone up for a random reason. And so I did do a lot on my own, but they also, a publicist, she reached out and got me like some local news spots. She actually got me, and then she said, hey, will you write an article that I can pitch to other publications? So I had written something up that she got in USA Today, and that was helpful. People magazine reached out to me like right around the time, and that was helpful. But I'll tell you one of the biggest things. So then I had a lot of people, that I worked with on, or like a lot of my influencer friends, like Cup of Joe, Joanna Goddard. I did something with her blog, and she featured something I wrote, and then that was also really helpful. But then, so when my book finally came out in 2019, I keep going back to Alt Summit as like a constant throughout this narrative, but I've gone to it every year for like 7 years now or whatever. So my book came out in 2019, and then Alt Summit was like 2 weeks later, which was great timing too. Yeah. And I remember waking up one morning, and when you're at a conference like that, you're on your social media a ton, you're Instagramming everything all the time, and my Instagram is just exploding, and I have all these new followers, and I can't figure out where or why or what's going on, because no one's tagged me and I don't know what's happening. Finally, someone alerted me to the fact that Rachel Hollis, I don't know if you know who she is, but she's an author. She's like a motivational speaker. She's written like Girl Wash Your Face, and she, she's written like New York Times bestseller books, and she had like over 1 million followers, and she was featuring my book on her Instagram live that morning. And it was just like, holy crap. Like, yeah. And so, and that was just because like, I knew she followed me on Instagram, and I didn't really know why, because like sometimes you get people who follow you that are like these big platforms, and it was a way for them to get more followers. Like people like, oh, this person's following me, I'll follow them back. And so at first I thought, is that why she's following me? But then I realized she actually engaged me a little bit, and that she followed me to like learn more about, disability and things like that. And so I sent her a book just like, on a whim. And so, she featured it. And so that was great. So to answer your question, the authors, they do want you to do a lot. Speaking with the women on that panel, some of them were like, I had no team, I had nothing, I was expected to do it all. So I think with children's books, they do a little bit more than that, at least what I've heard, but I don't know if it's a guarantee, if that helps. It's a long answer.
Yeah.
But it helps if you have a platform, because they want to sell books,
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not, I don't think, it's not like you have to have that, but it's never going to hurt.
So at what point then did the second book idea come? Was it during, like, is there overlap, or was it once it's out and then people are like, what's next? And like, I guess I'll do another one, or what was that process?
So it was interesting because like I had no idea like what good sales numbers were. And like, it wasn't like, the book came out. So when Charlie and Evan came out, it seemed like it was doing well, but like, I didn't really know. And like, my publishers weren't like saying, this is amazing. Like, and I finally just had to write my editor and be like, I don't know if this is like doing well, or if it like, and he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, yes, it's doing very well. Like, we're very happy. Like, it's really exciting. I was like, oh, okay. Like, cause I think to them, it's like, they're used to numbers being what they are. And I like, didn't know, I was like, I don't know what that number means. Like, there's 300 million people in the United States. I don't know if that's a big, anyway. So he would kind of break down a lot of these things for me. And so it was pretty quickly afterwards that they were like, we would love to work with you again on anything. And I was like, yeah, great. Like, let's do it. And so it wasn't overlapped, but it wasn't that far afterwards, because I knew that I was like, and even now I'm like, I would, if there's more, I feel like I have some more stories, I would love to see, there'd be a few more Charlie and Emma, but yeah, but it was neat because the first book, it was like, I had the very specific thing I wanted to write. And I knew from the beginning, like kind of how I wanted the story to go. I knew basically the characters I would have in there. And I knew the scenario because we had lived that scenario so many times. So there was a lot that I knew. The second book, I didn't know exactly what I wanted it to do. And I think this is what is exciting too about creativity, is that sometimes you have creativity that like, whatever, it's like inspiration or whatever, it just comes from you, or, you have this starting point. Other times you just have like maybe this like frame or this idea. And then, you want it to get to this point. And I feel like that's almost just as exciting to me as, you know what I mean? Like of just,
yeah.
I don't know, like, I mean, this maybe sounds lame to compare it to, but even like when I've done partnerships or something before with other companies, I like the challenge of being like, well, this is kind of what we're doing. And for me to sort of get to be the whole creative, like, how do I fit my message in my world into this, and how do I connect it? And I don't know, I think just sometimes like the idea of creating something from nothing, not really having a starting point other than like an idea, and then seeing it come to life is really neat. So I personally, I think Awesomely Emma is a better book. I think the themes are much deeper. I think when Charlie Met Emma needed to happen, because in my experience, living that life, kids, like, we needed something super basic for kids to be like, this is called disability and it happens and it exists. Because I feel like that was like, kids just like didn't know this could happen, But I think Awesomely Emma is just like, it's a deeper dive into things like accessibility. Emma is an advocate for herself. She's anyway, so I don't know. It's interesting. I really like both books, but it's like, I think the second one's better. I think it, and I love the experience of like, of just starting out with like an idea and like seeing it come to life. I don't know if that makes sense.
And what was the timeline for the second one then? So, because it was, quite along for the first time, and then when they're like, hey, we want to do something else. What
Yeah.
was the difference? And you too, having all the knowledge, and you're a different person at the end of, book
Right.
one. So what
So,
was that like for book two?
well, when Charlie Met Emma came out in March of 2019, and so Awesomely Emma came out in September of 2020. So that's a year and a half. And so that's, to me, that felt very quick compared to the first one.
And you didn't have like an idea of the book yet. They were just like, hey, let's do something. You were like,
I mean,
cool.
I knew that I wanted to write about accessibility. And so I had ideas
Okay.
about how to get that across, because I knew that was
Okay.
so I definitely knew that, like, I want accessibility to be a theme. I want some of these other things, like, and there's other themes in there too, again, of like her, she advocates for herself. Self-advocacy is a big thing. Her boundaries that she puts up about, like, not letting, her friends trying to do things for her that she can do, and she's telling them not to do it. So there was a lot of things that I knew that I wanted to incorporate, but for some reason too, and maybe it was because we were in the process of building our home, right? And so our home was all about accessibility, and knowing that, when you have a kid who's a wheelchair user, not just a wheelchair user, but a power wheelchair user, because her power wheelchair weighs 350 pounds. That's very different from a manual wheelchair that, you don't want to, you want to have independence, but if you have to pop it up over a stair, you can do it. You can't pop a 350 pound power wheelchair over a stair. And so, I guess I was really, really wanting to help kids understand, like, what there are people in the world who can't access spaces, and your friends might not be able to access spaces, and I wanted to make them aware of that. And the amazing thing is that this year also happened to be the 30-year anniversary of the ADA, which, like, I didn't, plan ahead of time, but this summer,
Wow.
it was like signed into law on like July 27th or something. So it was a little bit before the book came out, but it was just, for me, there was a lot of talk about things. The film Crip Camp had come out on Netflix, which was really exposing a lot of people, including myself, to who some of these disability rights advocates were that we didn't know. We don't know, we don't know who our disability rights advocates were. I mean, any kid who has a 504, you have that 504 because these people fought for them in the 70s and the 80s, and so I did have that idea, but I think, so I can't remember the timeline of everything, other than, like, to have the books come out like a year and a half. It was quick, because obviously that's signing that was me, like, passing ideas back and forth, coming up with an idea, signing a contract, negotiating all that, and then getting a manuscript and, like, going back and forth with that. So it definitely was much quicker than the other one.
Was it easier to launch a second one, like going back to like marketing plan, and like you were like, okay, I already knew the first one, and you just kind of borrowed from a lot of what worked, or
Well,
what was that?
I think in theory it would have been, but I think unfortunately the pandemic has caused some problems. So, for example, like, I did gather some people that I knew that was like, hey, we're going to send you advanced copies, and, like, will you guys share about the book? People I know who, like, share about my first book, or people online, they got their copies like 2 weeks ago because of, like, the mail and everything. And so, like, they didn't get them advanced, they got them like a month and a half after everyone else. And so there are things like that that still, so that kind of, I'm like, oh, so I feel like I haven't had quite as good of a start, but there are other things that I think are still coming through. And again, that's the good thing about a book, is like, and particularly with my publishers, is there, like, some publishing companies, it's like they really want to see that initial trajectory, and if it doesn't have that, and they're like, and I think, and when Charlie Met Emma did have a really great initial trajectory, but it also has longevity. And so they're like, your books, I think, they have a longevity to them. So it wasn't ideal that I feel like I didn't have quite, like, the great, send off. And, but I also feel like there's enough. The great thing is like, because Charlie Met Emma is still getting a lot of, good reviews, they build off of each other. Now I'm able to do, last year, I did author visits last year to schools. Now I'm doing some via Zoom, but I'm also able to charge for them now. I mean, I could charge, but as a first-time author, I felt a little bit like, I don't know, you kind of have to be careful. Sometimes you got to do stuff for free at first, I think. And so now I'm able to charge. And so,
well, with those, was that them, reach, or did you have the idea to go around the schools, or was that schools reaching out, or how did you start doing that?
well, see, that's the thing. This is the thing. It's like, that's a thing that schools do is they have author visits. They invite authors to come visit. And so I didn't really realize that until last year. A few schools locally reached out, and then this year, and that's one thing that I actually do need to plug more. I want to make that something that people are more aware of that I'm doing, because like I'm doing one for a school here locally. I'm still doing it on Zoom, but I did it with them last year, and so they're like, yeah, it was so awesome. It's going to be doing that. But then another a woman reached out in Germany, and I'm going to be doing some on Zoom for a school in Germany that I think it's on a military base or something. And so that's kind of the cool thing now is like I can do that in Germany, And so I haven't, honestly, like my head has been so consumed with like politics and the world that it's been very hard for me to concentrate on like and then again, it's really hard to work when your kids are in the background all day long. And so I feel like I haven't had the focus to do that as well. So I'm trying to like get back into like, okay, let's get a little bit more focus. But yeah, I guess it's kind of both is the answer. It's just that this is something schools do. They want authors to come. And then for me, on top of it, it's like I do a thing about disability. I'm teaching, I'm kind of do a little presentation on disability. I read the books, we talk to kids about that. And so I think it's like multi-educational. And I'm coming as an author, but I'm also coming as, someone who teaches about disability.
One of the things you mentioned this before, one of the things I really liked about the second book is you talked about like advocating for yourself, and it's powerful as a universal thing, right? Like it's one of the things that's vitally important. I think for your daughter, and being able to say like, hey, I want to be, I can do this. Like I'm good, and you don't have to feel like you have to do this. Like,
right.
But then just like as kids, like that's been the hard things with the pandemic. Luca has really, he's the youngest in second grade, and he's really struggled with, feeling the stress of like when you're in a classroom, being able to speak up, and it's like a teacher has easier ways to be able to see, but with everything being remote, he just feels like, oh, like they don't listen, they don't pick on me because they don't see me raising my hand, all these things. And so like that message, as I'm reading it to the kids, like it's good so they can know how to interact with someone with disabilities, but then also recognize that that's something that is universal, that we all need to, especially, being, having a daughter, it's definitely something that I really, think about with Ayla, of just being able to, it's easy to be looked over, and just making sure that and she is a really strong, and so I'm proud of that, but just you need to see examples of and I really loved that about your book. And also you see the kids, at the end there, they put in like take action, like they submitted to the museum to be able to have the ramp put in, and that there's so many things in there. That second one, I agree with what you're saying. There's so many things that were really powerful that I didn't even realize until you started talking. Like, I did really love those parts. Like it was, when you finish the book, you just feel like, yeah, like you feel like you've accomplished the storyline. And so it was very well written.
Well, it's interesting because the other thing that, I think it's one of those things where I feel like people who are disabled, I think, can get a lot more, like see a lot of the things maybe easier, but because one of the narratives that is challenging in there is, what does kindness look like? Because I think a lot of times, especially for people who are disabled, kindness is doing something for them. Kindness is grabbing that thing, falling over yourself to open the door. And what Emma is saying, you want to be really kind, you want to be really helpful, you challenge the system on my behalf. You write a letter on my behalf and you sign it, and you get behind me to actually make the world more accessible for me. And I think that is something that is so often
I have goosebumps. Like
Yeah.
from you saying it, like, and that was really powerful. I completely agree.
Yeah.
That's a very powerful message.
That narrative of what does kindness look like in the disability community is a tangly one for them.
Yeah.
Because they're the recipients of a lot of kindness, but not like deep kindness, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does.
Yeah.
I want to finish up. I've kept you, quite a long time. I appreciate the time that we spent. I wanted to kind of close and just give an opportunity to ask. I kind of ask this with a lot of people. I think it's an interesting question, but so you have a moment to talk to 18-year-old you, right? So you walk into a room, just two chairs, and you have a moment to sit down with 18-year-old you, knowing all that you know now. What do you say to 18-year-old you?
What I would say to 18-year-old me, it's a lot like what I would say to like 43-year-old me. Because this is something that I feel like I'm just barely starting to understand, which is that um, there's no such thing as a late bloomer. Like everything that you have done, because I've seen myself in that way a lot. I'm 43. I feel like I'm accomplishing things that people much younger than me or whatever in a career or whatever. And I think I would tell myself that there's no such thing as a late bloomer. You're learning at exactly the rate. Everything you're doing is building upon everything else to be where you need to be at that point in time. So don't worry about forcing things. Just keep moving forward, and you'll get where you need to go. You'll get where you need to go by just putting one foot in front of the other. And there is no such thing as a late bloomer. Who says that this isn't exactly when I'm supposed to have done everything that I've done?
Yeah.
This timeline that we think we have to be on. It doesn't. It's not a real thing. So
We stress ourselves by putting these arbitrary dates and figures of and you look back. I think about this a lot too, because you put this stress thinking that you have to have it all figured out, and I look at my parents and people in their 70s and 80s that are just like they don't have it figured out. Like
yeah.
you're all in kind of in the same boat, and so like relieve that pressure, I think is a really great message.
And if there was someone I could like convey to myself that the older you get, the less you'll know. And so don't worry about it. Like the more you think you get older, and it's, I think you probably went through this in your transition to Mormonism. You thought you knew a lot of things, and then you kind of open yourself up to like, what do I really know? And when you start to see all these perspectives of the world and all these different ways to live a life and all these different ways to be true to yourself or do these things, I just feel like I don't know that I know that much anymore for a certainty. But I feel like I'm a lot more open to things and perspectives and people. And so I don't know,
Yeah.
just to
I
not
also think,
so much.
yeah, and I completely agree with that. I can't remember where that quote comes from, but I want to say like Plato or Aristotle, it's the all I know is I know nothing. It's
Yeah.
that same thing. Like the more you learn, the more you realize you have no idea. That we all have no idea really, and that that's okay. I think one of the things that for me in kind of my evolution is that it's okay to not know. I
Yeah.
think there was always this idea that you need to know, because you go to school and everything's about knowing things and planning things out and when are you going to do this and that. And it's okay to like, I feel very comfortable not having an understanding, and I'm not afraid to not know something or to be wrong. And
Yeah.
I think that there is a power in that.
Yes. Yes. I think that, yeah, like you said, to be wrong and to not know. And I think, I had a thought. I don't know where it went. But Yeah. Just for me, I'm surprised how much I'm still learning, I guess, too, all the time. And I think that's exciting too, that you're always going to,
Yeah.
and just to be really open to that, you know? Um, no, I think that's the hardest part about being a young adult in your 20s is at least I did, and I feel like I know a lot of people I know did, is we felt like we had these very fixed ideas and we had arrived at these truths that felt very concrete. And when they get knocked around a bit, you're like, hey, wait a second, and you gotta like,
Yeah.
and you gotta just like be open to it more. So I don't know.
But I think that leads like my whole thing is the same thing in my late 20s, kind of like waking up to a lot of stuff. And to me, like my whole message, my whole life is wrapped around this idea of kind of two main principles, which is that evolved out of this evolution, with doing the magazine. But it was, this idea of living life intentionally, and with that, the power of challenging your assumptions to create better, well-rounded beliefs.
Yeah.
And I really think when I look at, like, that's the main thing that I really try and get across, is that at younger ages, the younger you are, that you start to challenge your assumptions and challenge the dogma, which is the thinking, traditional thinking, and that it could be possible. And it is just such an opening to the possibilities of who you are, who you can be,
Yeah.
and what you can bring to the world. So I think it's kind of along the same lines of what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Huzzah.
Well, anything kind of last words that we didn't get into? I feel like we covered quite a bit.
Yeah, we did. I mean, I would just say, don't let the bastards get you down, That means nothing. I feel like that's someone said that once on like a comment on Instagram, and I feel like that's a really great like phrase to end on.
So remember, that's the quote from Amy. Don't let the bastards keep you down.
Just kidding. Well, I don't know. I think we did cover a lot. So
in just closing, where can we find the book and find out more about you and follow and all that?
Yeah. So I think the best place to follow me is probably on Instagram, This Little Miggy, Miggy, because my blog is This Little Miggy Stayed Home. So you can look that up. Miggy is a derivative of my middle name, which is Manon, which is Mignon. Did you know that? You knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just like the French thing and all. My books, you can get them anywhere. You can buy books basically online. Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, target.com. I totally encourage people to reach out to your local booksellers, though. Obviously, at this point, I think it's super important. So you can go to indiebound.com and you can enter any book in there, and it'll connect you with, and like your zip code connects you with the local booksellers. So.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know about that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, check out IndieBound. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amy. I appreciate it.